This is not Optimus Prime, this is not Prowl, and this lovable scamp is not Megatron. You have been lied to, and it's time to uncover the fun and strange story behind an unjustly forgotten middle child of the Transformers franchise, which helped to bridge the gap between two of the most iconic and memorable incarnations of the Transformers. I was born in the 90s, which means that I was way too young to actually appreciate Beast Wars when it came out, since I was busy at the time figuring out stuff like what fingers were and how to stand up. So my exposure to the Transformers at an early age was all the stuff that came out in the 2000s. I never saw Beast Machines when it first came out though. I guess it just didn't air on any of the TV channels that I watched at that point. I do vividly remember watching some Beast Wars reruns, however, in particular one episode where the Maximals are stuck in animal mode and they have to be taught on how to turn into robots again by a tiger. Like, as a really young kid, that confused me because it made it seem like these were kind of animals who turned into robots rather than robots who were disguised as animals. I guess I just didn't get that much context. But one show that I did watch a lot as a kid was Robots in Disguise from 2001. I was 7 years old and prime audience to watch this cartoon trying to market action figures. I did not own a single toy from this show, nor did I really understand their existence for like 2 more years. So all that I knew was that there were these giant robots punching each other. And that was more than enough for me. I didn't manage to catch every single episode. In fact, I completely missed the entire final arc of the show because I have absolutely no recollection of Megatron becoming white and calling himself Galvatron at the end. But still, it's the first Transformers show that I properly tuned into, rather than it vaguely being on in the background sometimes. Little did I realize that the reason behind its creation in the first place was actually pretty interesting. So while writing this review and doing a little bit of research by watching the basics and reading TF Wiki, I came across this little descriptor of the show in one of the funny little captions that TF Wiki often puts under its pictures. The George Lazenby of major Transformers iterations. Yep, I mean that basically covers it better than I could with this entire video. R.I.D 2001 is nobody's favourite Transformers show. Few people would call it god-awful, although I have seen that claim made a few times. But nobody's out there claiming that it's a hidden masterpiece either. It's in that awkward middle spot of adequacy where you can watch it and get something out of it, but you'd probably pick a different show to watch before this one. Although I have to imagine that this show was a bit of a big deal when it first came out. It was the first Transformers show not to feature Maximals for a very long time, and it was finally definitively set on Earth in the modern day instead of prehistoric Earth or post-apocalyptic Cybertron. In 2001, this must have felt like a bit of a breath of fresh air, because it felt more like a classic Transformers show than anything for the past decade. The heroes were Autobots again, Optimus Prime was back, and a truck, albeit a red fire truck rather than being a flat-nosed red and blue conventional truck. Although the enemies of the series weren't Decepticons, well, except for when there was a subgroup who called themselves that, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Instead, they were mostly Predacons, who did indeed turn into animals, albeit giant robotic versions of same, so this still had elements of the Beast era before it. Before talking about R.I.D 2001 as we know it in the West, I wanted to talk about how we got here, because that in itself is a really interesting story. In the West, the Generation 1 cartoon story seemingly ended in 1989 with the conclusion of the Transformers Season 4, also known as the 3-part story, The Rebirth. There was no Generation 2 cartoon though, just a repackaged Generation 1 with obnoxious and pointless CGI transitions, which really isn't worth talking about. As far as we were concerned, the story of Generation 1 didn't really pick up again until the twist reveal of Beast Wars Season 2, which was that it wasn't really a reboot, but rather a continuation of the original cartoon storyline in this new show. Once its sequel series, Beast Machines, came to a close in the year 2000, that was kind of the end for the G1 continuity from our perspective, since the subject of today's video, R.I.D 2001, and a then upcoming Unicron trilogy, were treated like complete page 1 reboots. But in Japan, that was not the case at all. While the first Japanese exclusive G1 cartoon was Scramble City, that was really just to bridge the gap between seasons 2 and 3 of the G1 cartoon. But instead of import the American Rebirth season, Takara instead decided to launch their own storyline.
With blackjack and hookers!
With their very first show, The Headmasters. From there, Takara produced Super God Master Force, Victory, and Zone, all full-on Generation 1 continuations. Then, between seasons 2 and 3 of Beast Wars, Takara produced another continuation, this time set in the far future, called Beast Wars 2nd. Once Beast Wars ended, instead of importing Beast Machines into the Japanese market, Takara decided to produce a sequel to Beast Wars 2nd, Beast Wars Neo. The final show in this long string of Generation 1 continuations was Car Robots. Hence what I said at the beginning of this video. Every single character that you were told as kids were rebooted versions of Generation 1 characters actually had no relation to the originals whatsoever. This Optimus Prime is actually Fire Convoy, and him looking like a modern, updated Optimus Prime design is kind of something that Takara inherited from Hasbro. See, back in the 90s, when Beast Wars was first launched, the original idea was that Optimus Primal and Megatron would be the literal original Optimus and Megatron from G1, just in new bodies. But as the development went on, it was ultimately decided to make them new characters, so the leaders of both sides just ended up coincidentally looking an awful lot like their namesakes, although Primal was eventually written off as a descendant of the original Optimus Prime, whatever descendant means in a race full of robots. But this, and the fact that they'd already made Power Master Optimus Prime into a totally different character called Jinrai in Japan, meant that Takara ended up with something of a tradition among its Autobot and Maximal leaders, often making their own original Optimus lookalikes. So then we get Lio Convoy and Big Convoy, and the leader of the Autobots in Car Robots, Fire Convoy. To keep things simple though, and to maintain Hasbro's hold on various previously copyrighted names, when the show was translated for the Western market, Fire Convoy was renamed to Optimus Prime, Gigatron was renamed to Megatron, Mac Alert was renamed to Prowl, and what we know as Ultra Magnus in the West was originally God Magnus. Huh. But this gave the Hasbro folks the perfect opportunity to introduce the idea of reboots to the Transformers for the very first time. This actually proved pretty controversial at the time, and by that I mean that fans were complaining about it in forums and letters. But with the introduction of this concept that not everything in Transformers had to be connected to the original show or the original comics, well, it really softened the blow when the next show, Armada, was in some ways an even bigger departure from the original. Still, I'm getting way ahead of myself. Armada is the subject of another video, and I won't get too into the weeds on that particular topic until it comes to that video. Point is, R.I.D. 2001 had 3 main mission objectives. 1. Fill in time so that Hasbro and Takara could map out the next phase of the Transformers. 2. Get the audience used to the idea of reboots for the very first time. And 3. Sell toys. I mean, come on, that's always the main goal of this entire franchise, isn't it? So, there remains only one question. Is the show actually any good? Yes, damn it! I don't like how a lot of fans talk about this show, because it's a hell of a lot of fun. I have legitimately heard people call this show garbage far too many times for a series which in no way deserves that kind of label. It's a nice looking, well animated, funny show with great action and some pretty decent ongoing stories. I mean, okay, it's not great, it's not mind blowing, don't get me wrong here, but I could list a hell of a lot of shows in this franchise alone which are far worse than R.I.D. 2001, R.I.D. 2015 for instance. What you have to bear in mind though is that the Transformers anime following Beast Wars went in a very different direction than what it did in the US. In Beast Wars' original US version, it went darker and more serious with every passing season, and Beast Machines ended up with an incredibly dark tone and grittier stories. Character deaths ended up being a recurring event in both shows, with an emphasis on character drama and addressing what it's like to be in a war, despite some goofiness and slapstick which would make its way into Beast Wars right up until the end. And in my opinion, that was always my least favorite aspect of that show. Well, the goofy tone and slapstick humor was dialed up to 11 with a Japanese dub, turning every character into cartoon caricatures of themselves, with improvised jokes and lunacy all over the thing. The comedic tone of the Beast Wars dub carried over to its sequels. Beast Wars 2nd, being entirely animated by Japanese studios, meant that they could have the visuals really line up with the comedic tone they'd set with their version of Beast Wars, having more and more comedy elements added to lighten the tone. Neo had a tad more of a serious tone in some aspects, but it still carried forward that silliness in many ways. So when car robots came around, the Japanese writers and audience were very used to this kind of thing. Meanwhile in the US, efforts had been made to have more serious stories and darker tones at this time. So R.I.D. 2001 really stuck out like a sore thumb. The English dub did make changes where possible, mostly to tone things down a tad, but they had to follow the silliness of the animation and general plots, where the Predacons were often more of a danger to themselves than they were to the human race or the Autobots.
Don't talk with your mouth full. Catch! That's better! Terrorize!
The show also introduced us to various characters who would become fan favorites over the years. While I'm not entirely certain that Sideburn ever got the fan recognition that I feel he deserved, his various Pepe Le Pew style antics, where he was always chasing red sports cars that he had a thing for, but ultimately getting his butt kicked and punished for his bad behavior, did often get a laugh out of me. This got further used for really great comedic effect during the Fun Publications days, where they revived the character of Sideburn for some Generation 1 based stories. But that's a story for another video. Stay tuned for that. The second character to have a big impact on Transformers fandom is Scourge. You might recognize that name as being this guy from Generation 1. Yeah, he's got nothing to do with R.I.D. 2001 Scourge. This is just something that Transformers did in the early 2000s. You might also remember this as the name of the Unicron Herald from Rise of the Beasts, basically being the main villain of that film. This version of Scourge being basically a half clone of Optimus Prime, originally an Autobot protoform, basically a blank slate body of a Transformer before it takes its true form, like a robot fetus, I guess. Reprogrammed for evil by Megatron. He scans a truck at the same time that Optimus Prime is holding onto it, and thus becomes a copy of both that truck and Optimus Prime, in both body and mind. Though to me it's very funny that this character with this distinct look, a black repaint of Optimus with teal accents and red eyes, has become so iconic, evolving into what we nowadays know as Nemesis Prime, mostly because Scourge is more or less a nothing character in this show. He's evil and bad and serves Megatron. And then at one point, he and his completely personality-free Decepticons want to betray the Predacons and overthrow Megatron. But Megatron sees through it and reprograms Scourge to be totally loyal to him, basically rendering the entire plot moot and a waste of time. But still, he looks cool, right? And who doesn't love an evil Optimus Prime? The nature of this character and his connection to Optimus in this continuity led to a lot of people suspecting that Scourge from Rise of the Beasts was going to turn out to be an alternate version of Optimus Prime. Like, people really thought that the movie was going to connect back to the Bayverse films and have Bayverse Optimus Prime go back in time because he's now the servant of Unicron and, like... Look, it was never going to happen, okay? There's even this one scene in the movie where his mask comes off and it's like it's just nothing. It's just someone with a scary face and sharp teeth. But the big one for this show, the one character that the vast majority of fans can agree on as the single best addition for this series... Come on. Right. But the big one for this show, the one character that the vast majority of fans can agree is the single best addition that this series ever made, is Skybite, the Predacon with the heart and soul of a poet.
I don't care about boring mundane science. I much prefer eloquent poetry.
I can't front, I love this guy. He's so hapless and likable, despite the many attempts that he has made to kill the Autobots and his various gleeful declarations of his own evil.
Would you like to hear my latest work? I wrote it in honor of the ancient seafaring muses. The cobalt ocean roils. Zephyr's blow cold and another hapless foe is crushed beneath my heel.
The truth is, I never really bought that he was a bad guy at heart, and frankly, neither did anyone else. He's far more interested in spinning his latest poem than he is in conquest. By the end of the show, he just kinda gives up being a Predacon, since he was clearly never very good at villainy. Even Megatron can't escape the silliness of this show. While this villain does try to be taken seriously as a threat on many occasions, he's stuck with generally incompetent minions, who who have no clue as to what they're doing most of the time, and often mistake random, unimportant objects as things of either great value or great power. Even later, when he becomes Galvatron, or Devil Gigatron as he is in Japanese, and gets this major upgrade in terms of physical power, he's still the goofy villain that you can't take that seriously, considering he keeps ordering his forces to get largely useless items. Though he does ultimately find the one actually useless thing on planet Earth, when it turns out that his original plan was to find the ultra-powerful Autobot called Fortress Maximus and twist it to serve his evil purposes. But guess what? He can't even really get that right, since Fort Max is literally designed so that it can never be used for evil. So Megatron's whole plan in this series hinged on using a weapon which he can never actually use. What a goober this Megatron/Gigatron is. Admittedly though, his design is the absolute bomb. I love everything about him. His look is so incredibly intricate and detailed, yet ultimately very cohesive. Much of the design cues seem to take their inspiration from Transmetal 2 Beast Wars Megatron, right down to the orb in the center of his chest. In the final year of FunPub's tenure running BotCon, the official Transformers convention, they actually remolded this figure slightly to make it into a version of Beast Wars Megatron. While the actual story that went along with this makes literally zero sense and is probably best left forgotten, the figure itself is utterly gorgeous. Hell, every take on this figure slaps. It's so good. For one thing, I really like this show's interpretation of Ultra Magnus. I know he's obviously not meant to be the literal same character as his namesake from Generation 1. Like I said, every character in this show was renamed for the Western market, which also included dialogue changes to fit the new version of the story and rewrite some stuff, including the personalities of several characters. Magnus in this version is straight up just Optimus Prime's brother, the explanation for which being that they were both built at exactly the same time by the robot elder Alpha Trion, another way for the American version to try and homage Generation 1. The reason Magnus shows up on Earth in the first place in this show is that he's jealous that Optimus Prime got the Matrix of Leadership instead of him. It's never fully explained why he feels like he's more deserving of it, beyond him just being self-absorbed, but it's pretty clear why it would go for Optimus Prime rather than Magnus, given his actions in the aftermath of that decision. Magnus is pretty great in this show, actually. He's such an arrogant jackass and a real douche to the Autobots at first. He's got a pretty great arc which lasts through quite a lot of episodes, actually. Going from a rogue Autobot who makes himself an enemy to both Autobot and Predacon at first, but ultimately comes around to being much more a consistent and loyal ally of the other Autobots. I also like that it's really not an immediate change. He keeps his distance from the rest for a significant portion of the series, rather than just being suddenly a good guy and it's all fine. Even the Autobot brothers end up with some pretty legitimate reasons to not trust him, before things eventually get settled far more slowly than you would expect. And yeah, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that Omega Prime just looks incredible. This is one of the best looking combiner modes that I have ever seen. It's an absolute beauty of design. Finally, in this little addendum, there's the perpetually unlucky human character, Kelly, whose suffering brings us joy. She's basically the comic relief victim of the many battles and goofiness that goes on over the course of the show. Constantly the butt of jokes and always made to suffer some silly, though ultimately harmless, unfortunate fate.
I'm going to pretend that didn't happen.
I apologize, ma'am, but you're gonna have to take a cab. Sorry.
Kelly just always ends up in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sadly, despite being kind of great in this show, her appearances are pretty much limited to just this show. So unlike a lot of other human characters, like Sam Witwicky or Carly, she doesn't get homaged or pop up in other places down the line. Except this one little cameo appearance in the Dreamwave Armada comic. Like, I didn't even notice this until I saw it mentioned in the TF Wiki article while I was researching for this video.
Are you all right?
For someone who's been attacked by a giant flying squirrel and a huge toad, a maniacal shark, and a monstrous skunk, sure, I'm just fine.
Okay, so my script was nearly done, and I don't really know where else to fit this, so I guess I just have to mention here that there's also Teletran 1's descendant, TAI or Tai. She's like this combination anime schoolgirl flight attendant hologram thing who serves as the Autobots' space computer. Why she looks like this is never really explained, except to say that this is anime, so you should have expected it.
I'm Tai, Tactical Artificial Intelligence System, daughter of the Teletron 1 computer program.
Oh, also, I guess I accidentally forgot to mention that literally anything about the human character, Cody, mostly because I really don't care about this show's human character, Cody. He's your typical anime kid. He misses his dad, a scientist who was kidnapped by the Predacons so that Megatron could get his giant floating hand mode on some massive energy source. Most of the time, this barely affects Cody, being mentioned seemingly more out of obligation than any kind of emotional arc. He gets in trouble a lot and has to be rescued. Like when the Predacons make a new train to go super fast and Cody just happens to be on board. By the end of the show, Cody's dad is rescued and they're happy. Cody really doesn't contribute enough to the show for me to care, like a lot of human characters in Transformers, especially the kid ones. This franchise has a really hard time balancing its human and Cybertronian cast members in almost every single incarnation. Now look, I'm not going to lie to you and say that R.I.D. 2001 is somehow the former show ever made, but I'd also be lying if I said it was anywhere near the bottom of the list. It kinda sits how it always has, and always will, at the exact middle point in the scale of quality when it comes to the Transformers. It's not amazing enough to be beloved classic like Transformers Animated or Prime. It's not a majorly flawed and yet ultimately fondly remembered piece of the history of this franchise like Armada or Cybertron, and it's also not the indefensible garbage of shows like Energon or the Prime Wars trilogy. It's a perfectly adequate bit of programming, which some people remember as a pretty good show that they think they can remember watching. There it shall remain for the rest of time. Hey, so before we close out, I just want to mention that I'm actually working on a ton of video projects, including some really complex and interesting ones, at least to me. The biggest video that I'm working on right now is a look at both the 3H Productions and Fun Publications fiction, 90s all the way up until 2016. There's some genuinely amazing stuff which gets unjustly overlooked over the years, and I just really wanted to spotlight it. I'm also working on 3 videos covering the Unicron trilogy shows, Armada, Energon, and Cybertron. With luck, the Armada video, the script for which has actually been completely written, will be the very next video that I produce. The differences between Armada and its Japanese counterpart, Legends of the Microns, actually is really interesting and makes for a really fun topic to discuss. I actually had a lot of fun scripting it. Please do subscribe to keep up with my ongoing projects, whether the smaller ones like this or the huge retrospectives of things that are coming up soon. Thank you for watching, and I sincerely hope that you have a really great day.